Just like show business, we're a couple of minutes late. Welcome to another episode of Ahead of the Curve. I'm your host, Geoffrey Platt. Today, I've got my guest, Shannon Harvey, on board with me from Creative Alchemy One. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Pleasure to be here. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. So Shannon, can you give me a little bit of background of where you started and where you came from, kind of the same way we kind of kick these shows off?
Yeah, absolutely. My world of pixels goes back about 15 years. I originally did my bachelor's in opera and then changed over to directing at school. I was at Carnegie Mellon, and then I did a master's of entertainment technology. For about the last 15 years, I've had a real focus on basically the integration of video game type systems into live theatrical performances. That's been a huge part of my life. My master's was focused on that, and then I went from there and worked at Philips, and I've worked at Disguise. So I've kind of gone between being a consultant, working on projects and helping people with various products and technologies in lighting and video, and thinking about the integration side and workflow and those areas. Over the last couple of years, I've done a lot more consulting, and I also was the course leader for the BA Live Visual Design course at Backstage Academy in Yorkshire, up near Leeds, and head of research at Production Park. So Brilliant Stage is now part of Tate, and so I was the head of research there, working on large concert tours and those types of things. So kind of broadly all over the place, but mostly focused on a lot of previs, a lot of 3D workflow stuff, and automation, integration, lighting, how all those big types of shows come together, and what the technology behind that is, but also how the stories are told and how we create good experiences.
That's awesome. It sounds like you got a pretty wide range and a pretty diverse background. So just out of curiosity, where are you originally from? Because your accent definitely does not line up with being from England.
Yeah. I'm originally from Colorado. Born in Boulder, a long time ago now. I haven't been in the U.S. for many years. I think I've been outside the U.S. now. I think I've passed my half-life. So I've been an expat American longer than I've been in the U.S. as a citizen. So. I've lived in the UK for almost 15 years. Before that, I lived 8 years in Australia. I'm 41, so yeah, I've passed my half-life. So
yeah, I've actually just about passed my half-life being here in the US. So it's kind of weird and kind of eerie in some ways, when you realize that you've been born and spent part of your life in one place, and then all of a sudden you've transitioned, and you've woken up one day and you went, "Oh crap!" Like I am no longer where I'm from anymore.
Yeah, I've honestly felt like an expat as like the defining factor of who I am. When people ask me, particularly in Europe, people will usually ask me if I'm Canadian first, like they don't want to offend me. And I think it's also because my accent, while it's American, like I've been in Australia for a while, I've been here for a while, so I say like slang that's very British, even Yorkshire slang. But I do it with really hard R's and L's, and language is funny. My kids have really strong accents, but they aren't like me at all because their mom is English and they now go to school in Yorkshire. So they have this kind of Yorkshire thing going on. But anyway, life and culture, life takes you where you're going to be, right?
It's true.
I've moved a lot and traveled a lot with these types of roles, and that's just part of our existence, right? Until this year, anyway.
Well, I think this year has kind of changed the dynamics for just about everybody and everyone. I know a lot of the viewers that have been watching the show week after week have commented on a lot of the changes and life changes and things that have happened over the course of the last several months, good and bad. We've seen a lot of dynamic shifts and changes, especially within the live entertainment industry. It's been a little bit of chaos kind of going on there, but I think things are starting to finally settle down a little bit.
I hope so, man. I unfortunately think we're about to be hit with so much bad news in our industry. Things are collapsing. People are going to fall apart. So I think it's a rough ride. We're in for a rough ride, and I think as I've talked to people and I've communicated with different, whether it's clients or coworkers or colleagues or whatever, I think everybody is in this position where for us we had to pivot. right? We had no choice. Like, I couldn't wait for live events to kick back on to make something of that. And so we had to make creative and critical decisions and just start going for it and saying, you know, coming out of lockdown, we want to be doing something. We want to be seen doing something and be out there doing something to hopefully give other people some inspiration that actually there's another path behind besides just like sitting and waiting with your head in the sand for something to fix itself, which doesn't seem very likely from a lot of people.
That whole theory and mentality doesn't seem to work very well, does it?
Well, it's different attitudes, and everyone's taking different things from this whole experience, and you know, it's a shock. Like, we mourned for the first couple of months what life was, right? And I think for our industry in particular, you know, mental health is an issue that hasn't really found roots in what it is, and it's actually a dysfunctional system what we've built. You know, we've got massive companies who are horribly indebted in finance from all the equipment that they've got with certain artists in this level, with clients in this level, but actually all the basis of all of that is a freelance basis of people who are artisans who have no union, have no protection, have no collective agreements at all about how this should all go forward. And unfortunately, we were not resilient as an industry. We are not resilient as an industry. And so
Yeah.
I think it's just an interesting thing to evaluate going forward is like, how do we want this to look? Because we know that it's not going to look anything like it did before, and we also know that who knows who's going to be standing at the end of it. But you know, how do we want this to look as a community? I think is an important question that probably should be looked at or discussed at least. So
there's no doubt about that. I've actually got a few people coming on to the show in the weeks to come where we'll be kind of diving a little bit more into some parts of that conversation at least. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, you know, Laura Frank creating Framework as kind of a sense of or place for community for a number of artists inside of our industry and the live events industry to kind of come together as a community and try and work things out. But I think you're right. I mean, the mental impact just by itself is absolutely tremendous. And, you know, this whole event has changed people's lives. I mean, it changed mine for sure. But I know it's changed yours, and it's changed in a lot of other people's lives kind of throughout this. So
yeah, absolutely.
Let's kind of spin this around a little bit more on a high note and start speaking about some of the things that you have been doing and some of the good things that have been coming out of this and some of the places that you've been experiencing. And, you know, I know in our last conversation last week, you know, you were talking about just the health of your kids and, you know, the experiments that you've been going through and the company that you've been kind of building up. And, you know, these areas that you've been looking in terms of content and content design and creation and storytelling within an extended reality environment. So let's jump into that a little bit. And
yeah. Well, I think the whole extended reality XR push that's come over, you know, been really stimulated by COVID. It's been really interesting to see. I think, you know, there were a handful of companies who were really starting to do stuff over the last year, really pushing forward. And, you know, there's been a lot with Unreal and Notch and Disguise and these companies who have been all kind of layering in this, but it's still been, and it is still essentially beta research teams out there working in isolation in a bit. Like the integration might be completely different from group to group. And, you know, the process is something that's still being defined and still evolving. And I think there's kind of been a couple of things going on. The first is there's been a surplus of kit that's been available. So a lot of people have been like, oh, well, let's build something and then we can at least play with it and test it. And I think that's totally valid and valuable. But my question has been around how do we communicate that to clients? And how do we help creatives tell stories in this new medium? How do we, what are the possibilities for creative use and what does it cost? And what are the challenges and what are the places that you really need to think about? And so coming out of lockdown, I got together with some former students of mine, some lovely gentlemen, Kayla and Ashley, who have a company called Lucid. and Lucid Technologies. And we agreed that we would basically put together the kit we needed to be able to play in this space and to be able to understand this space and to work on it and create something that we could potentially offer to clients, or at least that we would understand how it works so that we can know when we're asked questions about how it works, how to answer. And because I think that's really the big thing is it's a real jump to think in 3D for a lot of people. It's an even bigger jump to think about volumetric film, right? And there's some really big challenges with that. So going back in kind of beginning of June, we decided we manifested everything we needed, and we put together a space, and we started making some stuff. And at the end of June, I came to this point where I was like, I've done the tech demo thing. Brilliant. I've nailed that. Got that. I can show that I know how AR works, and I know how an LED screen works, and I can do tracking, and I got that. We're sorted. But then I was like, need to create something. Like, don't have a client necessarily. Like, we're 2 months into this R&D process. We're not going to necessarily, and actually the supply chain's pretty broken down, really, where your agency's got people on furlough. The clients decided they've written off this year, and other than their TikTok, they're not really bothered about the tour or anything else that they were planning to do. So like, where does that client and what clients fit in? Like, with the experience I have, I'm not going to compete with ILM. I'm not going to be making The Mandalorian next week, right? But what can I offer to clients today, and how do I bridge some of those gaps? Those were all the questions that we kind of were left with at the end of that tech demo phase, where we were like, okay, well, how do we create case references for ourselves so that we can understand these processes and these questions and this workflow a lot more? So in July, I put together a team, some more of my former students who are available. One of the great things that I've had is I've had over 60 students that have worked.
So you could have a really good resource pool to pull from.
Yeah, I can immediately drop in, and all of them are under 25s are going to be more affected. I mean, I really feel for kids in school and everything. Like my kids and the students that I've had and everything. Like, trying to figure out university stuff right now and whether to go back because it's virtual. All this stuff, it's a mess, right? And people who are recent graduates coming into this market, there's just nothing. There's no chance, and most of them right now have been furloughed and are now getting fired, right? And that's from every event company that they could possibly be in. And so I immediately went to the two who were closest geographically, because that's a thing, and they're actually close friends. So we were already kind of forming a bubble, as it were. Like, we could work together in a bubble, and we were already going to be in that contained space. And we had a few opportunities. We had a training video that somebody had asked us to do, and we had a workshop that a Disguise had asked me to do. And we knew that we could make our own kind of sales pitch about what this technology was. But most importantly was that I decided that I needed to do a narrative piece. Like, I needed to understand more than just create a TV studio and let somebody present live in that space. Like, what happens when you need to make specific shots and you have a specific storyline that you're trying to share in how this piece is going to go. And so we made a list of, like, what are the technologies, what are the things that we want to test and put into this show, and what's the story that will help us to tell that through line, and what is the intention? Like, why do I need XR? Why do I need extended reality to tell this story? Why do I need augmented reality effects? Why do I need a real-time engine producing this environment? And by asking those questions and making something, we have so much more information now than we ever would have had before, because we've gone through essentially a self-contained case study that allows us to, like, mold and pull the right resources together to be able to now answer a lot of those questions and some insights that I've been surprised. I've been like, questions about color and tracking and where and how you, like, the amount of time and effort required to get to shot when shot is locked. Like, once you've done that, you're not necessarily going back and doing much post-production. In fact, the goal is to do none. But actually, in what I've been experiencing since we shot, was actually there's some things that we can do in post-production, and there's some things that we should do still in post-production. So finding that balance is like, it's really interesting. And so yeah, it's been a fascinating journey. And in 28 days in July, we built 4 pieces, and we are about to release Imagination, which is our short film. It's only a couple minutes long, but it's packed with tons of ideas and innovation. And again, that question of intention. Let's find the intention of why we need to use this technology and why I couldn't have just filmed it in a nice building somewhere, right? Why do I need to go through this process and use an LED stage and do all of that? Why do I need to do that? That was really the big question that I had. So,
and that's actually a really good question. Like, why extended reality? So let's just dig into that a little bit more. And it'd be interesting to hear from the viewers too. You guys working as well tightly in a bubble? Are you guys also working in extended reality or been playing extended reality? I know we've spoken about it a lot recently, but we've really talked about kind of the concepts of extended reality. We've talked about technologies behind extended reality. We've talked about some of the impacts, but we really haven't actually dug into why extended reality. There are, of course, some key fundamentals. And the other thing that poses another question, especially dropping to film or dropping to tape, is the elements of that. You brought up a really good point just a minute ago. Consistency in shots and going from scene to scene. So it would be interesting to discuss that a little bit more. But let's kind of dive into the whole why extended reality part first.
Yeah, sure. I've got a great piece that I've discovered, which is I'd like to have a debate, and Vincent's here, so this is great. We've got
somebody that
are already doing similar things. So, where do you decide where color is ultimately chosen, and how do you make that choice? Like, if my end result is to camera, but then I want to be able to do color correction after that, right? Like, should I shoot log and raw 10-bit and be able to then take that final footage into DaVinci? But if I'm going to do that, how do I deal with the LED that has to be a specific color? Like, you need to have all of that really well thought out. And actually, like, originally I was doing all this work in Maya and Substance to do all of my world building. But then I start taking that into Notch or Unreal, and that's actually a slightly different color space, and maybe it doesn't quite, different monitors, and like, how are you calibrating through your whole process to then ultimately get onto LED and into camera, right? Like, there's some really interesting questions about what is the best workflow to get from an efficiency point of view in making the stuff so that you can get to camera as quickly as possible, right? and color is really hard, as Vincent's saying, right? Like, we found the consistency in trying to go from room to room, even different angles in the same room, was really challenging in being able to get an accuracy in our color space. And after the fact, the most amount of post-production that I've had to do has all been about color. And
that's totally understandable, because you've got to be able to follow a chain of consistency, and that consistency happens from the creative process all the way through to delivery. And if you're not tracking proper color spaces or chroma spaces within color, and your color depth bit rate and everything out, or color depth, then you're going to not come out with the result that you're looking for at the end.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be consistent.
And this is the thing about shifting the workflow, like the whole thing about what is the advantage for XR, right? We're going back to that for a second. So other than I can swap out the environments potentially more rapidly, and I don't have to do major location shoots or those aspects, right? Like, those are obvious wins for virtual production. And particularly under the pandemic conditions, being able to have a space that can be adaptable for different types of shoots and different types of environments in that way is a huge advantage. When we start to get into AR, then the intention, I think, needs to be a little bit greater. Rather than just going for, like, okay, I'm going to have pretty stuff flying around the person or whatever. Like, what are the interactions? So people talk to me and they're like, oh, dust, or I want to see a group of butterflies flying in front of the thing because that's an important key moment, or they want specific lighting, atmospherics, and stuff like that. So those are some of the intent and some of the questions, but fundamentally that still comes down to the story, right? That comes down to what in the story is driving the need for why that should be a key thing? Yeah, well, there's some comments coming in, so just
Renvier, I think I'm pronouncing that right. He's basically starting out because the pandemic's forced change, an adaptation of change into virtual production. I can tell you, Renvier, you're not alone.
Yeah, I totally get that's a driving factor for creation of studio spaces. I don't know if that's a driving factor for clients using it, and because ultimately clients want quality, they want consistency, and they want to have something that adds value in the chain that actually makes the process easier, more efficient, and in some way better than what it would have been to do it in another way. And so it's an interesting question, and I hear over and over and over from colleagues in the industry, and there are posts online all over where people are so disappointed with the way that virtual events are currently happening, to the point where they're like, let's not try to do virtual live events because that just seems like a bad idea. And it's like, well, so what are the problems that people are having, and how do we address some of those from a creative intent question? This whole point of like, how can we, like, I've been watching the Democratic National Convention, and there are some atrocious moments in it, and it's calling out for really good extended reality, support and in some way, and like use of stages in every single state across the entire country to be able to bring key people into an environment together to be able to present something, right? It's calling out for that type of creative idea. But there's no way that would have happened in the time that it needed to, given the current conditions. So these are all questions.
It's also a time of trial and error. No matter how big or small, there's going to be bumps in the road. And if you just ignore it and you don't try it, then you're not going to be able to experience it, and you're not going to be able to learn what works, what doesn't work.
Absolutely. And I think at the moment, it's from a lot of people that I've been talking to, there's huge questions about, like, I want to get into this. I want to try it. How do I get my hands on this? How do I build a show reel so that I can show that I can do this? And it's like, well, this is exactly the problem that we were at 8 weeks ago, 9 weeks ago. We said we needed to tuck in. And I think Vincent's in the same boat. The Evoke Studio, they've now done real client work. That's brilliant. You're one of a handful. A lot of people are still trying to figure out how to turn the system on, and and some people don't even have access to the kit yet. We're talking about still extremely beta software across every manufacturer that we're working with.
Even the workflows. I mean, I was actually talking to Vincent a little bit offline about workflow just a few days ago, and there's a lot of pieces of the workflow that have to still be worked out and sussed out.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I one major thing for me was I did all my pre-work in all of my world assembly. That was stupid. I won't do that again. I will always now do my world assembly in whatever engine I'm going to be rendering out in fully, rather than trying to essentially build it twice.
Yeah, that's it. The Department of Redundancy department.
Yeah. And there are things like that I thought the workflow that I was doing was the way that was going to be most efficient, and it wasn't. And you learn from that, and you go, okay, now how are we going to progress that, and how are we going to make changes with it? So, yeah, I really feel like this whole thing is really about establishing a new medium, and we're now defining what the rules of that medium are, and how to best get the most advantage from that medium, because it's the use in cinema and the use in TV and stuff, it has to be at least as good as, if not better, in what its intention is, in order for it to be every single shot of a feature film is going to be used in this way. And The Mandalorian is a really good use case, and a lot of people are trying to push for that now with various things. But then you look at Avatar or something, and they're still building massive, complex sets, and yes, they're integrating more digital into that, but there's still a physicality that cinematic people are going to request and require, right?
Yeah.
And music videos and other markets, fashion and things, they might be capable of going into a virtual type of thing, but they still have an aesthetic and a demand for quality, and a demand for consistency, and a demand for broadcast that has to be really clearly established. And I think that's yet to be fully realized in our collective work. And I mean, like, there's some good examples, but it's all coming out so fast. And we need to be able to, and I think a lot of that's also the desperation and the concern that a lot of companies are really struggling. A lot of individuals are struggling, and they're desperate for a win. And we should be working together to try and figure out how to communicate that to our clients and get as many people working as we can, really.
I couldn't agree with you anymore at all. I mean, that in part is actually a small piece of why I even started the show, was to try and bring people together, connect people to other technologists, to other parts of the industry that they might not be aware of, and create those connections with people so that people can start to build these collaborative spaces, and be able to work more together than separated. And we see that we've been seeing that a lot in the past, but it's a different world, right? Things have changed a lot. You bring up a really good point about there's different levels and different tiers of production and production quality and budget. And, a lot of the things that we've been basing everything off of has been on the higher end. We haven't really spoken about what mid-tier looks like, and even what lower tier and lower tier bid budgets look like, and how those are going to work into basically the markets and the way that we work, because not everybody can afford, hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars on just the equipment side, let alone the production side and the production value.
So I'm willing to talk about this because I own my own IP, and I have I'm my own client, so I can talk about a bit of that. Look, if I took some baseline numbers, which actually probably aren't what you'd want to charge for commercial things. We've come to a price that I can rent if I want to rent the space that I helped with Lucid and their space, and that's the commercial rate that they're renting out per day. And they gave that to me essentially in kind for the work that we did, because we're also promoting their business, right? So in total, I paid everybody, but I probably only spent about 5% of what the commercial value of that total work would have been. And I, in total, calculated about 158 grand would have been the total cost for the content, for everything, for 4 projects that we filmed in 8 days. And of those 4 projects, 60% of my time was spent on the short film, of which is only 2 to 3 minutes of actual content in the end. And the majority of that was the majority of the time effort we spent, because of the level of detail and the amount of integration and the amount of consistency that we needed to be able to put into that particular project. Our little sales demo was probably the cheapest. The training video that we did and the live presentation we did, they were actually, at a pretty reasonable price point in comparison to if you were doing that event in person, or less actually than if you were doing that event in person. But I think the pressures of putting all of that work on the front end were also really interesting, because it was a rush to get 4 projects done in 28 days with a team of 4. Like, that was a lot of work.
Yeah, I can just imagine.
And that was also the thing, is like identifying how much work did we do? How many hours did we put in? Getting those stats back and being able to analyze that and be able to publish it as well is something that I'm wanting to be able to share that as a case reference with the community. So that is coming. Our goal, as I said, has really been to explore these questions and to ask these questions, and then to give our feedback and say, this is where we can see some efficiencies in being able to make this quicker. This is the major hiccups that we found. These were the problem areas that we came across, because everybody's going to have problems with tracking, right? Everybody's going to have problems with color space. Everyone's going to have different configurations of LED that they're thinking about. Somebody's going to be using Spike, or they're going to be using Moses, or they're going to be using Black Tracks, or they're going to be using a combination of, and stage precision somewhere in there. And then somebody else is like, well, screw D3, we're not doing that. Let's go straight to Unreal, right?
Yeah, I think Chad actually just brought up a point, right here in the group, just mentioning about that a couple of seconds ago, about the workflows just being so diverse right now.
Absolutely. And from my point of view, as a person that really wants to be focused on content and on creation and on workflow in general, I want to be able to build a world that can drop into a green screen virtual production studio, or my Unreal world can go straight into an Unreal display, or if they happen to be using Disguise, it can go there, because actually you might have 3 different members of a company who are in 3 different major capital cities worldwide, and that's what's available. And you need to bring all of that together in some way, right? So every question, every project is always going to have these different integration questions, and we've just taken it up literally a notch, sorry for the pun, because the integration right now is so much more complicated in all the different number of systems, and also how fresh they all are. You know, I love being in the small groups for these things, because it's like, oh, great, Axel's put out another version of Stage Precision, and it works with this new version of Unreal, and oh, I've got to download that one now, and then now I've got to upgrade the D3 one. Oh, back to that one, right? So it's crazy how fast that change is happening. Like sometimes every day.
Yeah. Well, right now, I mean, that's what's being worked out, right? So those workflows, those changes, the tracking software plays an integral part in it. So there's going to be updates every single day. Delivery of content. You know, those builds are just refining and refining and refining those workflows.
We created a terabyte in a month with 4 people, and that was including all of our captured footage on the other end, and you know, just managing that data, managing the pipeline. Like, you know, major feature films and stuff have been working on major pipeline stuff for years, and it's really locked down and really solid, right? Live events, we try to lock in a pipeline, but usually it's different groups of different different literal companies, sometimes from completely different parts of the world, who are working on individual pieces, and getting a systematic pipeline to camera is actually a lot different than getting it purely to screen in a live show in some ways. So it's just interesting to see how, like, people are coming at it from different angles. And, you know, Chet's mentioning, like, I think more Unreal virtual production green screen people might actually be more of the cinema film people, whereas, you know, you've got all these live events people who are like, I've got 4x4 sitting on the shelf. Let's go to town, right? Or GX4 is more likely, or GX2s, or whatever.
Or even just the familiarity of working inside the software. You know, you can take Notch artists that can do beautiful work inside of Notch, and they don't have to work inside of another software like Unreal, and they can produce a fully produced extended reality piece just by using those alone, right? I just want to let the viewers know there's a lot of comments that are populating, which is awesome. There's been some great questions that have been popping up. If we don't get to them right away, we will work on getting to them throughout the conversation.
Happy to answer some of those now if you want. Like, you've got a few.
Yeah, I mean, Christy popped one up a little earlier in the feed about clients being too overwhelmed with the reality of the effects of the pandemic, or are clients too overwhelmed with the reality of effects of the pandemic to embrace extended reality?
Yeah. Look, I think for an early adopter period, we picked a bad one. But, you know, that's I mean, like, it is a really serious challenge, like a pandemic-stricken early adopter period. You want to try and get clients to engage and to be excited about a brand new thing that literally is being done by groups of people who are wearing masks in bubbles. It's exciting and it's new and it's different, but a lot of companies are still really struggling with whether or not they should even spend money right now. You know, if you're, you know, a lot of companies have just gone, nope, not going to do it till 2021. And the trouble with that is that a lot of companies won't be there to be able to do that work in the future. And that's, I feel bad in North America, because I don't feel like they've had the same support that we've had here in England. You know, I feel like I've been actually supported a little bit. And even that, like, we've got protests going on here, and I've gotten no government assistance for what I'm doing other than more debt, right? So, you know, that's the reality of the situation for most of the companies that are trying to go and do this stuff, is that we're all, you know, especially the independents, we're doing this because we feel a need to create and to continue and to be creatives who are out there doing something. That's what drives me, is to take people on a journey and help tell stories and create things, right? I'm not desperate to do that. I have time. I've got enough to be able to make that happen. But the reality is, I'm doing that on my own because I need to, and because I feel that this is something that is going to be huge. You know, this new medium is going to be epic. That's sorry, I keep using puns.
I was just about to say that's quite punny.
It is a new medium. It is a new medium. In 2006, I was doing my master's thesis, and I wrote a part of my paper that was on creating volumetric projection effects for live shows. And it was all about whether we could control fog and do projection mapping and try and bring that into the live environment and bringing game engines in and all this. And that, like my master's thesis was basically now what I'm doing. And now I can work in volume. And 15 years later, I have the tools to be able to do that. And I look at that and I'm like, wow, it's really cool. And I look back at like Ray Bradbury and Ray Kurzweil and people like Don Marinelli who've been like writing for years about how there's the convergence comes towards the holodeck closer and closer by the day. And actually by working in volume, that's what we're doing, right? That's what
we're getting closer and closer and closer to it every single day.
Absolutely. And the transformation on that to every industry, not just live events, not just corporate communications, not just music videos and artists, and to all of those people, that transformation to be able to work volumetrically, to be able to create to camera live with generative effects that are working well. That is going to be transformational for some mediums. Some arts will get a renaissance because of that. And new arts will be formed. New stories are going to be able to be told because we couldn't tell them without those tools. And for me, that's what drives everything. Story drives everything.
Well, it also ties into interactivity and being able to interact with your medium and your content as well, right? I mean, extended reality has opened that up within the gaming engines and real-time engines because just of their native ability to be able to do it in real time. But there's also other elements that can be easily integrated, into the scenes, because I could see scenes and see places where you're already starting to see some very early adoptions of it on things like Netflix, but being able to kind of guide your own ways down these stories and interact directly, with yourself or with groups of people going through an adventure or a situation in a branded storyline based environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some really interesting the stuff around like Bandersnatch and what they did with the Netflix and all of that. There was a certain amount of success with that in creating that narrative, the narrative interaction. And I think that's a huge piece for audiences to be able to interact with the performance in some way is such a key thing. And we're seeing some great examples. Like there was the lighting show that happened very recently, and there were a couple of shows that have happened where people are using their own engine builds in Unreal, but then they're feeding in generative content that's coming from multiple sources, or they're allowing people to have a web GUI to be able to control certain aspects of that show. And that's all really exciting stuff. But I'm really excited to see where that kind of narrative interaction, or doing live theater or live circus or live opera in an XR stage where maybe actually the way that the audience is responding at home in some emotional way or some whole is actually impacting not only color, but maybe also the density of the environment around them, or the way that the environment is affecting the actor is being drawn into that story. And I think there's some, we're at the cusp of actually engaging with audiences in ways that we never could in a live theater space, because we have their attention and their integration in a one-to-one relationship. The intimacy. I've been amazed by some of the stuff like Tomorrowland and all the big, massive festival DJ sets that have come out, which are Unreal Worlds and all that. They're beautiful, right? Huge, beautiful, epic. I can run around, great. But where's the intimacy? Like, I'd rather be having a one-to-one conversation with that artist in some way, or
Also, where's the story to it?
Yeah,
you've got these big, beautiful sets and these DJs playing, but it's just like being at a it's being at a festival without really anybody around you, or at least you've been embedded in an environment with people around you.
Yeah, I really, I think people have struggled. That's why every corporate presentation person is going, got another Zoom call, and yet at the same time, that for a while, for March and April, man, everyone was so excited to be able to have that level of connection, and now it's like, oh dear, gotta do another one of those, you know. and I feel for, I feel for everyone. Like, we want that connection. We as humans need that. We crave and we need that social interaction. We need to be around a fire, telling stories, because that's our cultural DNA.
Welcome to my campfire, Shannon.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Anytime.
This is my campfire.
Yeah, absolutely.
You and I and everybody online sitting here commenting. It's awesome.
There's a really great book that I highly recommend if anybody can actually find it, because it's only a single print edition and it's very, very, very rare. And it's called The Death and Resurrection Show, From Shaman to Show Business, by a gentleman by the name of Rogan Taylor. And he basically creates a direct path of lineage from pre-agrarian society, nomadic tribes and cultures in the prehistoric era, moving all the way through early Christianity and the festival plays and the wagons that they used to take to be able to tell the Bible stories through, and then takes that all the way through into through the Greeks and the Romans before that. Like, he follows this lineage all the way up to people like John Lennon to say that they are shaman, that they are mystics, they are people who are telling us stories, they are people who are enriching our lives through the medicine of storytelling, of myth, of magic. And that's where I find that I like to imagine that we are right now with all this new stuff. Is, that's why I call myself a creative alchemist. Not only the name of the company, but like I like the concept that everything we do right now is mutable. There's a transformational quality to the space. There's a transformational quality to the storytelling, that suddenly we can literally cross blend senses. We can go for a synesthetic experience that we're trying to shape and guide the story with the use and enhancement, the augmentation of this type of technology. But it has to come back to the root of, why does the story need this emotional connection to the audience, and how do we use this technology in this new medium to evoke that connection more for people? And that's really my soapbox. I'll hop off it
now. And you've just told a wonderful story, and you've had me engaged. I'm sure everybody that's been watching engaged as well, just in the story that you've just told about the book. And it brings up a really good point, because we've been talking about this again week after week, is how do you create that engagement? How do you create that interaction inside of virtual production, inside of virtual environments? And it's been something I think that people have been experimenting with a lot. I mean, Microsoft Teams actually just came out with this new feature where instead of having basically windows, it takes everybody and basically chromas them into a like bandstands and seating. So that you're getting these different aesthetics, and you're starting to see companies get creative and starting to push it, but it's still, I think, kind of the holy grail to being able to open up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Production kind of holds.
Absolutely. Well, I'm interested to know where. I mean, I'm really interested to see how it goes for this entire year, and what it's both the bar has been lowered and also the bar has been raised simultaneously, with no rules about how distribution or how other than, do I get enough people to see it, is really kind of a defining factor at the moment in helping to tell the story of extended reality as a medium. And that's something that should be celebrated by everybody in the community that's trying to do that. And I'm really excited by what I see coming out of different studios, and I'm like, wow, look what the guys in Thailand did yesterday. Holy, or wow, look, they're shooting another thing at Evoke. That's amazing, right? Like, it's exciting to me to see across the world how everybody is learning and building and creating, and it's awesome. And what a cool time to be in this medium. What a cool time to be using this kit. It's great.
You know what? Just for fun, I'd love for the viewers, if you guys could comment, just put in one line. Where are you from? Could be just the country, could be just the state, doesn't matter. I'd love to see where everybody is from that's viewing right now, because you bring up a really good point, and I think that's one of the really wonderful things about what the age that we are living in today. And it's also, I think, something that's really been driving the need for us to still interconnect, and we're interconnecting a lot more through technology, which has been driving a lot of the advancements, I think, inside of virtual production and inside of extended reality pipelines. So Shannon, as well, kind of diving a little bit back into the storytelling within extended reality, what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've had in portraying a story within extended reality? Nice.
Yeah, I think for, well, so I'll just take this case example that we have for, this case example that we're using right now. So this little show, Imagination, this little short film that we've created, Imagination, it's only 11 or 12 total shots long. The consistency thing that we mentioned earlier, trying, again, finding dealing with things like scale, like what is you're dealing with world scale, but then you change a little bit about where that camera perspective is, and suddenly it doesn't quite match where you were the scale before. And like, it's really interesting working within this, you learn things like sometimes moving the world is far better than trying to change where the camera is, and adjusting different connections are, that's really been interesting. I think, the major first hurdle that everybody has to overcome is going to be the tracking problems and how they deal with understanding where people and things are. And that's a key critical thing to working volumetrically and working in extended reality, is you really have to know where everything is, and across multiple systems and the connections between that. But again, for me, the real core piece was around how do I link together a narrative experience and a full story into this, and how do I went for the effect that I was trying to fill it with different things. I have 14 different effects or processes that I was testing through the making of the projects that I have. So we were using a reality capture, photogeometry or laser scan 3D model from a Swedish museum. We were doing real-time performer and real-time camera tracking. We were doing augmented AR on that performer from a rigid body. We're doing NDI instead of ray tracing because we didn't have GX2Cs, we only had GX2s. So instead of doing ray tracing, we were using NDI on mirrors so that we could feed the virtual scene back into mirror elements, for example. We were using perception neurons, so we created a digital avatar that could interact with our real performer and had certain levels of success with that. But we didn't have hands and we didn't have face, so we had to create a character that would connect, that didn't have to be visually expressive in the face to tell the story. We're dealing with a brand new actress, my daughter, who had never acted before, so children and animals, as they say. But she
was saw her in some of your demo reels, and it was pretty awesome just to see the expressions on her face when she saw what the results were. Yeah,
and I think for her it was this amazing realization. She spent all week telling all of her friends at school, "I'm going to be star in a movie. It's going to be great." And she was so excited to tell all of her friends. And then she got there and she was like, "Actually, the movie has nothing to do with me other than I'm a prop. And it's all about the world that you're building and the environment." And when she had that realization about how much effort was going on into creating the world around her, it was a really interesting for a 9-year-old to have that realization. It was quite phenomenal. It was the first time she'd ever come to work with me, which was really interesting. But also just like, here I am working with my own child in a bubble, under not lockdown but still restricted conditions. Remotely with a team, because we were up in Edinburgh away from home. Like how do you deal with just the day-to-day mix of all of that is really an interesting challenge. And so working with a new team, my team, even though I had worked with all of the team before, for every single person there was a new software to learn, there was a new workflow to understand, there was a new process to go through. And so skilling up everybody into that workflow was a huge challenge. And so that was, really interesting to pull that together. Yeah, and for me, the end result is really about the analytics that I can pull off of the whole experience, and that I can look at the story and I can look at what worked and what didn't, and I can now implement that into the workflow going forward. And what are the next steps? What do we want to test next? What are the areas that we really want to work on?
Well, what's the story? What's the story you want to ultimately tell?
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. And at the moment, I'm starting to look for that. I'm working on what is the next thing that I'm going to create myself. Because I really believe that as an artist in the medium, that I want to create original things as much as I want to help other people. And so I'm already looking at what the next story I'm going to tell is. That's coming soon.
Yeah. No, and that's amazing. I was just looking at some of the comments also flying flying around, and it looks like my friend Brett and my wife are having a little bit of fun punning around in behind the scenes, which is actually, again, really awesome because it kind of tells the whole story of what we're doing here today, right?
Yeah, it's really nice.
There's been a bunch of people from all over the world that have tuned in just to kind of prove the point about collaboration and about what's going on and how interconnected we really are, which has been absolutely amazing. I know that there's been a lot of production that's been going on, of course, over in the UK. There's been a lot of collaboration that's been happening from the UK into LA, for example, into different studios, and a lot of different means of communication methods and communication protocols. I know there's been VPNs, virtual private networks being built in between different countries for people to be able to securely remote in to do their thing inside the production environment. So it's really neat to see all of these different things kind of come together, and these companies start to work together as one.
Well, I just want to say it's great to see some really familiar faces, and thank you everyone for coming to engage in this conversation with Jeff and I. It's awesome to see some really important people in the industry checking out what we're doing. So thank you all for joining us. From me, I appreciate that.
So Shannon, how would people get in touch with you? I know we posted a little bit earlier, but how would people kind of engage with you and get to know
Creative Alchemy One, creative-alchemy.one is our website. We are actually in the process of, I think it's the third time this spring that I've updated it. We've decided to push ourselves as extended reality architects. I know there are great world builders and stuff out there, but we want to focus on the story and the way that all comes together, and how we can help clients to tell their stories. That's really my goal. And I want to work with studios all over the place. From my point of view, I want to work with the client to help bring them to work with a different studio depending on where they are geographically, or what the tools are that they need, because there's some great systems out there that people are building, and I can't wait to try some of the fun stuff on some stuff. I've done some work with Mark Roberts, for example, Mark Roberts Motion Control, for example, many years ago. But I know they've just built an XR studio that's got a robot in it, and I'm like, man, get me there. I want to.
I want to play.
And so I'm really excited to hopefully help clients to be able to identify, where is the best system for being able to do what I need to do in the location that my people are. Because that's really the big thing right now, is people aren't traveling. If you're not 20 miles from the headquarters or where the CEO's yacht is right now, it's that's a reality of the situation that we're going to be dealing with for some time. So, how can we help people tell stories, and how can we share this story? How can we share the extended reality journey that we are all on, and get as much excitement behind this new medium as possible, and stand it alone. It's not cinema, it's not film, it's not theater.
It's a new medium. It's a completely new medium because the delivery systems are all over the place, right? I mean, hell, we're here right now, go live on 2 social media channels more than anything, just basically streaming straight live, and there's no reason why productions and shows can take the same suit.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see that a lot more. Every single day, we're seeing new podcasts pop up, new webcasts pop up. It's been insane.
It's almost so much information to keep track of. It's like how many different software manufacturers demos did I need to watch in April and May? I mean, I watched a lot of them, but there was so much information that suddenly was freely available, and that's brilliant. It's been awesome to watch the uptake of that, and the upskilling that everybody's had to do. It's been incredible. And I encourage everybody, to do that more and more anyway. But
Absolutely.
One last thing for me, Jeff, I just want to say, so this week we are going to be premiering this film. I was hopeful it was going to happen yesterday. I thought it might happen today.
I've been on the lookout. So I didn't want to bring it up. I wasn't sure, but
yeah. Keep an eye out on check out our Facebook page and also Instagram, etc. And for Creative Alchemy One, and check that out. And I'm also going to post a breakdown, shot by shot discussion of what I was trying to achieve technically. And I've also got a fairly sizable paper. Academic type paper that I'm writing right now to just break down the process that we went through, and I'll be publishing that. I don't know when that's going to happen, but pretty soon. It's definitely in the works. I've got a rough draft already, and I'm just getting some industry people and the manufacturers themselves to look over it so that I don't say something that I'm not supposed to, or piss off the industry because I'm too open about what we're doing. But I just want to make sure, from our point of view, it's about how do we establish this medium going forward? And I'm real pleased to have been able to be here and have this chat with you, Jeff. Thank you.
Well, I'm very honored to have you on the show, and it's been just fantastic having you here. So thanks for taking the time to be with me here today as well. It's always wonderful having these incredibly engaging conversations about, well, just about everything. I mean, again, covered an enormous amount of topics. And speaking of that, I'd like to let you guys know who's coming up next week. I've got Ted Pallas actually on from New York City. He's been in the industry for quite a long time, very experimental technologist. He's dabbled in a lot of different areas between digital art, content development, real-time engine, and experimenting within those different technologies. So make sure to come in and check it out next week. And we've also got a pretty incredible lineup of different speakers that are confirmed, which is awesome, that are coming up all the way through to the end of October now. And actually, Vincent on here is going to be part of one later on in September. And we've got a lot of wonderful content coming down your way. So everybody, as I say every week, thanks for tuning in and stay ahead of the curve. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you.